Okay. What's new in Spring Boot 2? You already know I'm a freelancer. If you have cool projects, approach me. Overview. What's new? Of course, new is that they increased the version number in the parent POM. You already know how the parent POM thing is working. It's no big deal. What did they also do? They renamed a lot of properties, and that means you have to adjust your application. They created a properties migrator project, which is basically proxying from the old property name to the new property name, and it's logging the names that you should change to the console. So while you're migrating, you can use this project to kind of like replace the property names that you have in your application, but then you should get rid of it. What's also new? The new baseline is Java 8. So if you're still on Java 5, 6 or 7, you now have a valid excuse to force your manager or to give you approval to upgrade. Hooray! They already have Java 9 support, so if you want to create applications with the new module system, you can do that. They also created a starter project for the new Java 8 date time objects. So if you're thinking about migrating to Java X time, for example, if you're using Joda time, you should include this one, then Jackson knows how to serialize your dates. Yeah, they updated many third-party libraries. One of them is Tomcat. It's now at version 8.5. It has support for HTTP2. They migrated to the newest version of Flyway for your database migrations. Also the newest version of Hibernate, and the newest version of Similief. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that. It's the template language or system actually. And yeah, so you can use all the new features. What's also new, if you're using JDBC to access your database, they switched the connection pooling library from the Tomcat connection pool to Hikari CP. Hikari sounds like Harakiri, but you will not kill yourself by using it. But it's, as far as I know, it's from Japan, so it's quite cool, and I know other projects or frameworks that use it since many years, so finally Spring is catching up. Well, now in my opinion, the really only thing that is allowing Spring to use a version 2 instead of 1.6 or something like that is that they introduced reactive support. Basically what they did is they created a new version of the REST library they have for exposing REST endpoints. That's called Spring WebFlux and Spring WebFlux FN. What's the difference? I will tell you shortly. They also created the Reactive Spring Data project where they have drivers for you so you can access various databases in a reactive way. Actually, who knows what reactive means in this context? Please. Actually, who doesn't know, please raise your hand. Okay, so that's quite a few people. What the Spring guys, or basically most of the Java people at the moment, mean when they are talking about reactive is that you have libraries that are working in a non-blocking way. So if you are accessing, for example, your database, they provide libraries that are non-blocking. So they will not block the thread you're running on. If you are making an HTTP request to Twitter, it will not block the thread you're running on. They have ways to access the file system which is non-blocking, and this allows your application to run with a very small number of threads, like the traditional Spring application or the traditional Java EE application, or Jakarta EE as it's called now. You will just configure a thread pool of like 200 or 300 threads, and every time you're accessing the database or you're handling a connection, it will just block one whole thread waiting for the database to answer. And in this new reactive programming way, the code is written in a non-blocking way, which means that the thread that is executing your request is not blocked anymore by those I/O operations. To go in more detail would actually be too much for this talk, so I encourage you to inform yourself a little bit about what reactive means. What they now also have as part of the reactive endeavor they have is an embedded Netty instance. So you can choose to not use Tomcat but also Netty. And yeah. As I said already, they have now HTTP2 support, and you can use HTTP2 with Tomcat, Undertow, and Chatty. As far as I know, Netty in its upstream project also supports HTTP2, but maybe they are not already using the latest version. So it will surely come at some point in time, but not now. Yeah, I've shown you Actuator in the first talk today. And they basically changed a lot of stuff there. What they did is that before most of the endpoints they were published and accessible by default. Now they switched this around, which is actually a good thing. So now you have a very small subset of the endpoints that are published by default, and for all the others you want, you have to configure them to be published. They also changed the base path. It's now /actuator. Before, the health endpoint was just /health, and the others also like that. So they are all now on the new base path. And you might remember that you could also access metrics of your application in the Actuator endpoints. They now switched to the project micrometer.io. This is basically like metrics collecting facade. So the same you have for simple logging framework for J, you now have for metrics, and behind this facade then you can configure whatever you want, like Prometheus or Datadog or New Relic or whatever you're using. Good. Spring WebFlux. WebFlux is the reactive way of creating REST endpoints in Spring. If you are a JavaScript developer, I think there's also just a project Flux in JavaScript where you can do reactive programming. RX. Okay, that's a different implementation, but yeah. Good. Spring WebFlux, it uses the project a project called Reactor under the covers. And what is Project Reactor? Project Reactor basically provides you with two classes. One is called Mono and one is called Flux. Both of them are streams. The difference between them is that a mono stream can have either 0 or 1 object, and a Flux can emit from 1 to any kind of number objects. And those stream implementations, for those who know the Reactive Streams initiative on the JVM, those are publishers in that sense. Yeah, because we are reactive, all those streams are working in a non-blocking fashion. They support back pressure, so if your database is not catching up, then you can create back pressure back to the user. Yeah, and it's a Reactive Streams implementation. That's the Java Enhancement Process 266. Yeah, Reactive Spring Data. Basically, that's a collection of library tools that help you access NoSQL databases in a non-blocking way. Those databases like Cassandra and MongoDB and Couchbase and Redis, they have non-blocking drivers since a very long time, but they are all different. And what Spring Data does is that they kind of create a common accessing layer, so it's easy for you to use them. when we are still here, for JDBC, there's not yet a non-blocking way to access the databases. At the moment, there's a Java enhancement process running where they are enhancing JDBC. I think they will call it version 5, which should include non-blocking ways of accessing JDBC. And there's already a proof of concept for the Oracle JDBC driver available on the net. But as it's just like a proof of concept, it's not yet available or not really supported by any framework. So if you're still running a normal JDBC, you have to find other ways to do the non-blocking thing. Yeah, reactive string security. It's basically just auto configuration of your application. So if you add this project and it finds that there is the Spring security jars in the class bus, and it finds that the WebFlux jars are in the class bus, it will configure them together, and you can use the normal Spring security annotations to configure the security of your RESTful endpoints. Okay. First thing, if you use Spring WebFlux, that's the hard lesson I had to learn today when I was preparing demo code that in case we have time I can show you. Get rid of the Spring Boot starter web dependency. Why? Because if you have this thing, it silently disables the Spring WebFlux functional interface, and you keep wondering why your code doesn't work like it's supposed to be. And there is no warning or anything on the console. So if you're starting with Spring WebFlux, remember this thing. Yeah, what should you do if you want to use Spring WebFlux? Basically, they have a starter for this. So just add a Spring Boot starter WebFlux dependency, and for testing in a testing reactive endpoints, there's a reactor test artifact in the IO project reactor group, which you can use to test your code with JUnit. So what's different? You remember the first talk today where I showed you how to create RESTful endpoints? Not really much changed in the way that you code your actions. If you look at this action, the only thing that changed is that instead of a string, we returned a mono of string. So that's who knows the optional type in Java 8? Everyone, awesome. So in my opinion, mono is just another word for optional, but so from a semantical point, it's the same thing. From a technical, it's a little bit different. But if you need help remembering it, then that's just the same. And yeah, the only thing we do here is return a static value, because that's just a demo. There's also there's a slide missing actually. There's also a functional way of creating WebFlux endpoint. That's the WebFlux.fn project. What you do there is that in your Spring application you have a place, or maybe many places, where you basically write down how the endpoints are routed in your application. What they do is you should create a bean called mono router function, and there are some helper classes that help you use the DSL here. So if you just write route and then opening bracket, then the IntelliJ will help you figure out what's the right thing. The current version of IntelliJ IDEA already has Spring Boot 2 support, so it's a good idea to use that. What the route is doing here is basically we have an endpoint called /echo, and it's expecting this endpoint is exposed with post, and if we get a post request to this endpoint, the method echo in the class echo handler is invoked. So who doesn't know this kind of syntax with the echo handler double point echo? A few of you, okay. So what this actually is like a way to reference a function in a class. So this would be the same like if I would just invoke echo handler dot echo and then give it some value in the parameters. So the double point colon, not sure how to call it. It's a way to reference functions. Yeah, method references. That's the right word. Good. Okay, so we have here the router, and we say, okay, if there's a post request to /echo, go to the echo handler and invoke the method echo. And here we see how this could look like. If you use this routing functionality, you need to provide a method that is taking one parameter, that's a server request, and that's returning a mono of server response. That's the way they think functional programming, functional web development should be. It's not really pure functional programming because usually you will have to access some underlying service and that's not passed in through the method signature. So it's not really pure functional programming, but the Spring guys think that's good enough. So what do we do here? Basically, we are just returning 200 OK and returning as the body the same thing that we got in our request in the body. Is this clear so far? Okay. Yeah, how does a test for this look like? They have a new class, so that's now the third way to access your REST endpoints in tests. They call it web test client. And what you can do is you just use this web test client, make a post and have this DSL for creating requests. And if you look at this, till the point where it's called .exchange, it's just a contract. Nothing is really invoked. It's just like a builder pattern. And when you do the .exchange, the request will be executed and you will get back the response from the server. And there then you can just say, okay, I am expecting a response of type string, and I'm checking that this is equal to hello WebFlux. A little more exciting or more real-world example would be if we have an endpoint where we want to get the details of a user by supplying the ID of the user. For example, if you have like a user profile or something, what you can then do is that, for example, you will have somewhere a service method that is called getUserById, and that's taking a string, and it's maybe going back to your Cassandra database, and because it's in a non-blocking way, you will return a mono of user. So the user can be there or it cannot be there, but you just return the mono. And what you then do is that you have this mono, that's actually a monad in functional programming, and you can do a flat map. What is flat map doing? It's just transferring or transforming one monad into another. And what you're doing is, okay, I take this mono of user, I take the user thing out, and I'm transforming it to a new mono of server response. And I'm just doing like, I'm saying server response, okay, what's the kind of answer I'm giving? It's everything went fine, so it's okay. I say the content type is application JSON, and then I say the body is from this object, and what's happening behind the scenes is that this from object thing is now invoking checksum and is transforming our user object to JSON. Yeah. Questions so far? No. Yeah?
In this code, the goal was to provide a user receiving the ID. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user can use the ID to get the response. And then the user
Yeah. You give it an ID and you get some user data like first name, last name. I will show in the next slide. You will see it.
Okay, my question was just like, where exactly in the code are we loading or requesting the user?
Yeah, in this get user by ID method. This could go back to your database, for example. And it's returning a mono because it's non-blocking. Basically, here is like a really simple and stupid implementation of that. What are we doing? We're creating a new user. We are setting the ID of the user and we're setting the name to be test and ID. In a real application, of course, you would go back to the database and load it from there. Of course, we also want to get parameters for our application or for our REST endpoint. You've seen in the code before here that we say request.path variable ID. And to use this path variable, of course, we have to specify it in the router. So here you see we created a router with two routes. And the first one is our Echo endpoint. And the second one is the endpoint where we're just receiving the user details using a get method. And of course, we are just passing in another handler and another method reference. Yeah? Yeah. Get user details. Wait a second. So what you're doing here is, so the question was, how do I get the ID from this thing into my action, right? Kind of.
Where's the ID which will be transferred?
Okay. To the endpoint. Okay, the question was, where is the ID which will be transferred to the endpoint? So what string is doing here is that it's taking this string / user details / and then those brackets and ID, and it's doing a pattern matching on it. And this ID will be, so if you have / user details /1, it will create basically like a map behind the scenes and put like ID as key and 1 as value. And this map you can then access in this request object. Or didn't I understand your question right? Okay. Maybe we can do it after the talk, I'm sorry. Okay, so how do we test this? We have this web client. We just invoke a GET request. We create a GET request with the URI user details /20. We then do the exchange with the server, and we are expecting here a body, and we can specify which class we are expecting. And Spring will behind the scenes use checksum to pass the body and create a Java object out for us. This Java object then we can work on in our test. We can, for example, use this consume with method and do the normal assertions that we are used to in JUnit. So I hope you didn't fall asleep till now. If you did fall asleep, it's time to wake up now. I'd like to say thank you to everyone for your attention. I'm now here for questions, and later we will go to a restaurant nearby.